So my mother-in-law was poisoning me, and I found out why. Everyone has their own nightmare-in-law story, though I couldn't imagine how bad mine would be. As it turns out, the worst thing wasn't my mother-in-law poisoning me, the worst thing was why she did it. I met Craig on one of my rare vacations, and we had a sort of whirlwind relationship. We fell hard for each other, and we were married in a courthouse wedding within 2 months without ever meeting each other's families. Mine visited a few weeks later, and after the initial shock, they really liked Craig. While we moved in together and figured out married life, I got to hear more about his parents who live near the rest of his extended family a few hours away, though we never saw them. My work schedule is rough. I work 6 to 7 days a week, and my off times are a blur of appointments and errands. I think of the 2 years before I met Craig, I only left the city once. I finally got a few days off so we could visit his family about 6 months later. His whole family came over, and everyone seemed thrilled to meet me except for his mom, Betsy. She was cold and distant and could sit there without saying a single word to me. It was creepy, but I kept trying to spark up a conversation. On our last day, he announced we should take an afternoon hike into the national park their house sat on the edge of. Betsy made lunch, and I was changing to go out when it hit me, just waves of nausea. I wound up in the bathroom for hours that afternoon. I figured it was just a touch of something and thought nothing of it. We went back a few months later and again thought nothing of it and had a great time except for Betsy. She wouldn't talk to me, though Craig brushed it off and said she was just getting to know me. He finally said we could rent jet skis the next day and said that we could explore the lake in the next town as a way to get out of the house and unwind, which made me feel better. I was so excited to tell everyone where we were going, but it wasn't to be. After eating, I got so sick I could barely walk for the next 2 days. At this point, I started to get suspicious. No one else was sick, and we all ate the same food. It seemed like Betsy may have been up to something, but it wasn't until our next visit when a night in a romantic cottage another hour up the road was canceled due to me getting sick that I was sure. Betsy had to be poisoned. Craig said I was insane. He said it must be an allergy to something his mom was using in her cooking, which actually made sense, though I never had time for an appointment to get it checked out. So I decided on the next trip that I'd make a big casserole and bring it with us. If I cooked the food and served it, nothing could be added. Well, I hadn't had 2 bites before I realized I had left the wine I was drinking unattended while I was heating up the casserole. My stomach was already doing flips, and you know what happened next, and it was not pretty. I was so sure his mom was poisoning me that I confronted Craig about it. I told him that I wouldn't visit his family again if she was there. It was our first big fight, and he finally said he wouldn't force me to visit, and we could figure out how to best deal with the situation. She had never been nice to me, so it wasn't a loss. The next time I got off, we decided to head to that little cottage we had rented before and not been able to use. We were driving past his family's place, and it seemed rude not to stop, so we compromised and brought some pizzas. I even decided to not drink anything unless it was water from the tap. We got in and threw pizza on our plates when one of his cousins arrived, and everyone briefly left the food unattended. I realized almost immediately, and we decided to try an experiment. Craig and I both had 2 slices, so we switched our plates while everyone was in the next room. Craig got so sick, I was really worried about him. The drive back to the city was awful, and we had to pull over a lot. He was a mess. We had him back home for 3 days before I broke down and told him that I'd switched the plates. I've never seen such anger before. The rage in his eyes is something that I'll remember for the rest of my life. He shoved me into the wall and then came flying at me. He threw me on the couch, but I somehow managed to grab my keys and phone and run out the door, not even wearing shoes. I luckily got to the elevator and made it to a friend's place safely, finally turning off my phone after I missed his 47th call. I had no idea what to do or when it would be safe to go home. It was the scariest time of my life. It was 2 days before I turned my phone back on when I heard a message from the police, and I drove upstate immediately. Craig was dead. Betsy had shot him after he broke into her house and charged her with a knife. I learned that Craig had been married once before, and his wife had died in a tragic hike. Craig had made a lot of money in the life insurance payout, and Betsy always suspected Craig had killed her, and was nervous about letting me be alone with him, especially out in the remote area he was so familiar with from his childhood. So she ensured that every time he planned an outing that I would be sick. It wasn't easy, but she didn't think that I would believe her, as no one else had ever shared her suspicion about Craig. I found the life insurance policies he took out on me without my knowledge afterwards, and refused to press charges against Betsy since she was only trying to protect me. I still visit her from time to time when I need to get out of the city, and I love her cooking. 2 of the most terrifying dolls to ever exist come down to Robert the doll and Annabelle. And first, we'll just start with Robert. And I'm going to be as respectful as possible when talking about this because apparently if you're not, you could die. That's why Robert's casing is filled with apology notes from people who have had severe bad luck after disrespecting him upon seeing him at the museum. So let's get into Robert's backstory. As you guys know, the movie Chucky, who was based on this homicidal doll, was inspired by the doll Robert. Well, there was this family, the Otto family, and back in the early 1900s, they had a 10-year-old son named Eugene, who was given a doll that was gifted by one of the family servants. Well, this doll is honestly just very creepy. He is 3 feet in length, and dressed up in a sailor's costume. And while this is terrifying now, back in the early 1900s, he was just a normal doll. Well, upon receiving the gift of Robert, Eugene got extremely attached to him. He'd bathe him, eat with him, and even sleep with him. I'm debating on seeing if this doll that I have is haunted. I'm a little scared to ask it questions, but maybe we'll try. But first, let's finish Robert's story. So Eugene continued to get more and more attached to this doll. And while this was normal at the age of 10, by the age of 13, it was a little much. His family would walk by his room and hear him talking to Robert. And they would hear Robert respond, but at first they thought Eugene had just made up a voice for him. But one day the mom looked in to hear Robert's voice, which was very deep, and did not see her son's mouth moving. So the father got terrified and was like, hey, you need to stop sleeping with this doll. And trying to convince them, he was like, he might get dirty. But he was just trying to create that separation. And when this happened, they walked back into his room in the middle of the night because they heard screaming and crying. And they walked in to see furniture thrown and his toys mutilated. As time went on, scratches occurred on the wall, things were broken. And Eugene would always blame Robert for these things. The parents were very worried about his attachment to Robert and also the fact that he was blaming Robert for all his mistakes. Things get worse. Well, Eugene's dad comes up with an amazing idea of what to do with this terrifying doll. He takes him away and places him in the attic where no one can see him. But Robert decides to throw parties up there. He would make noises, and when guests would come over, they would hear screaming at night. Neighbors would even claim that they would see Robert move from the attic window. So he was essentially just terrorizing this family. So why exactly was this happening? Apparently, the mom did not treat her servants very well and even walked in on one of them doing black magic. I mean, who knows if this was true, but apparently she saw this and fired her. And as a parting gift, she ended up giving Robert to their son. Potentially doing voodoo on him? I don't know. But these happenings apparently decreased this family's social status by a lot, which was everything back then. Well, Eugene grew up, moved out of the house, and got married. And the family just kept the house and continued to keep Robert up there. Once Eugene's father passed away, he ended up inheriting the house. So Eugene's family moved back into the house around the 1920s. And Eugene found Robert again. So after years of not being attached to Robert, Eugene starts this cycle again. He finds the doll, brings it down to his wife, and is like, hey, here's this doll. And let me tell you, she is terrified of it. She's creeped out. She's like, no. But Eugene essentially introduces Robert as the new member of the family. He brings the doll to work with him. He was a painter, so he would set him up and have him just watch his murals. He took him to dinner and would feed the doll again. And his wife sometimes would hear the giggle of a child and walk by the room to see Robert in there. And then one night Eugene asked if Robert could sleep in their bed, and his wife was like, absolutely not. So he just put him on a chair next to them, and she was getting horrible night terrors. And not only this, but his mood changed just like it did when he was a kid. Instead of tantrums, he would have mood swings and become completely abusive to his wife. But during this time, divorce was considered failure. So they just remained together. And he passed away in 1974. So Robert finds a new child to attach to. Well, during the 70s and 80s, there was this rise of being scared of cults and Satanism. And so when this 10-year-old girl moved in and got extremely obsessed with the doll, such as bathing and eating and sleeping with it, and then the parents would start to hear the deep voice respond to her, they were worried that it was something satanic. So they took Robert straight to the priest, but he ended up bringing them back, and they tried to do the attic thing again. Eventually, it was just given to the East Martello Museum in Key West, Florida, where he now resides in a little glass box. But there's so many offerings and apology letters to him because of people disrespecting him and him causing apparently bad luck. And so many workers have reported seeing him move. Either way, Robert, I am so sorry for talking about you. Come over to my YouTube if you guys want to see me find out if my doll is haunted, and also talk to you guys about the Annabelle story. I'm going to be asking her some questions and sharing the original story of Annabelle.
My 22 female, fiance, 25 male, wants his father to check my tomorrow night before I get married. My fiance proposed to me about 8 months ago. We decided on having a relatively small wedding, which is in 2 days. Everything was going great. He seems absolutely perfect, and we are very much in love. I'm a virgin, and so is he. He wanted to save it for marriage, and I wasn't fussed, so I agreed to saving it. He has told me earlier that in his family, the father checks the virginity of the bride the night before the wedding. I laughed this off as it seriously sounded like a massive joke. Nope. Turns out he was dead serious. He wants me the night before in a small ceremony type thing so his dad can check me while him, his brothers, and uncle can watch so that they know I am still pure.
What?
I told him fat chance I'm going to do that, and he was begging me to go through with it and how important.
My friend's mom tried to stab me and my sister. Storytime. Yes, honey, you heard that right. She tried to stab us with a knife. So at the time, me and my sister were 8 and 9 years old. And we went to the pool every single day. And we eventually made friends with this boy. We're gonna call him Tomato. Then our parents ended up making friends with Tomato's mom. Like, they ended up becoming really good friends. And after a couple months, Tomato eventually asked me and my sister to spend the night. Well, our parents surprisingly said yes. This is the one time, and the one time only, I wish my parents would have said no. Well, anyways, we went to the sleepover. By the way, it was our first sleepover we've ever been to. So we get there around 5, and we're having a blast. We made forts, we watched DT, we ate popcorn. For our first sleepover, it was going wonderful. However, the whole time we were at this sleepover, his mom was in her room. 11 p.m. comes around, and the mom comes out of her room, smelling like alcohol. She was drunk. And she comes out, she starts screaming at us. She thought we were home invaders. Then she goes in the kitchen and grabs a knife.
Am I the asshole for getting mad about my mom marrying my fiance's dad?
What?
I, 24 female, and my fiance, 24 male, have been together since our sophomore year of college, so around 5 years now. For context, my mom had an affair with a coworker when I was 16, leading to my parents' divorce. She has been single ever since. Sadly, my fiance's mom passed 2 years ago due to cancer, and his dad has been single since. My fiance proposed last year, but our wedding was delayed due to COVID. 3 months ago, in January 2021, we decided it was time to have our families meet for the first time to discuss our upcoming wedding. This went well. This morning, out of the blue, my mom called me and announced that she had eloped. I was shocked as she had not been dating anyone to my knowledge. Upon questioning, it turns out that she and my fiance's dad had been dating in secret since that meeting in January and had married in secret yesterday.